The classroom froze as Marcus, the quiet kid from the back, calmly solved a college-level problem on the board. Mr. Blake's smirk vanished with each line. His joke was backfiring fast. What happened next stunned everyone. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead as the weight of silence pressed down on the classroom. For a moment, even the usual rustling of paper and tapping of pencils halted, suspended mid-air like breath caught in a collective throat. Eyes shifted toward Marcus, drawn not by curiosity, but by expectation of failure. That expectation had teeth, and it grinned from the corners of smirking mouths, sharpened by the subtle permission of Mr. Blake's authority. Marcus didn't meet their eyes. He stared at the whiteboard with calm precision, not yet standing. His pen was still in his hand, a slim, worn-down ballpoint with bite marks near the cap. Marks from nights spent studying long after the rest of the world had turned in. Numbers had always been his refuge, his language of control in a world that too often misunderstood him. While some kids poured themselves into lyrics or jump shots, Marcus carved through mathematical chaos like a surgeon. But he knew that to Mr. Blake, he was still just that kid in the back. A silhouette. A statistic. Mr. Blake stood smugly at the front of the room, arms folded, chalk marker still in hand. His amusement wasn't cruel in the obvious way. It was patronizing. The kind of smirk that says, "I've already decided who you are." It wasn't just about the math problem. It was about showmanship, about sending a message to the rest of the class. Know your place, stay in your lane. The equation on the board was no mere problem. It was a performance trap, dressed up in symbols and matrices. A few students chuckled nervously. Jake, the teacher's pet and self-appointed top of the class, leaned back smugly, whispering something to the girl beside him. A ripple of doubt, disguised as laughter, spread through the room. Even the ones who weren't openly cruel watched Marcus like a walking tension wire, curious to see if it would snap. Marcus finally capped his pen, his fingers steady. He slid his notebook shut, stood up, and walked toward the board, slowly, deliberately, like a man carrying not just the weight of expectation, but of history. Mr. Blake stepped aside with theatrical generosity, as if presenting a stage to an untrained actor. The markers lay in their tray like bait. Marcus picked one up, and for a heartbeat longer he didn't move. He just looked at the problem, studying, calculating. Then he began to write. The tension in the room thickened, not with confusion, but with disbelief. It was a slow, creeping realization. Like watching a magician's sleight of hand only to realize there were no tricks, no smoke, no mirrors. Just raw skill. Every line Marcus wrote bled purpose. His symbols were clean, his structure disciplined, the kind of precise symmetry that spoke of long hours, not just of practice, but of understanding. He wasn't just solving the problem. He was rewriting the dynamic in the room, line by line. Mr. Blake's arms dropped from his chest. His smirk stiffened, trying to stay afloat as his authority quietly capsized. He approached the board, slowly now, cautious. A predator becoming prey in his own den. He squinted, half hoping to catch a misstep, a slip, a sign that Marcus had bitten off more than he could chew. But the problem was unraveling exactly as it should. No skipped logic, no fake bravado, just pure disciplined thought. The class was no longer watching Marcus fail. They were witnessing something unfamiliar, an intellectual spectacle they hadn't been primed for. The usual classroom hierarchy had cracked. Even Jake sat rigid now, the cocky tilt in his posture gone. He wasn't whispering anymore. He was staring, eyes narrowed. Not out of ridicule, but out of fear that someone had just lapped him on the track he thought he owned. Marcus stood motionless after finishing, marker still in hand. Then he turned, voice even and soft as always, but layered now with the weight of quiet defiance. "I double-checked the eigenvalue breakdown in the margin," he said. "It simplifies the third step." There was no gloating, no smugness, just truth, pure and unvarnished. Mr. Blake walked forward like someone approaching a minefield. He pretended to inspect the solution with academic detachment, but his fingers curled slightly inward, a subconscious sign of being cornered. He read the lines once, then again. His throat bobbed as he swallowed, trying to mask the growing knot in his pride. Behind him, chairs creaked as students leaned forward, not with anticipation, but with revelation. Some had underestimated Marcus. Others had simply ignored him. But now, they couldn't look away. They were watching a silent correction unfold, not of an equation, but of a narrative they hadn't questioned until now. Mr. Blake opened his mouth as if to speak, but nothing came. There was nothing to say. The mornings came quietly now. No buzzing alarm, no footsteps pacing down the hall. Just the soft padding of paws against hardwood and the occasional thump of Tank's tail as he stirred awake beside her bed. Megan didn't realize how much the silence had weighed on her until it began to shift. Until Tank, once a storm of aggression and confusion, began to move with something closer to intention. He no longer barked at shadows or paced the room in spirals of anxiety. Instead, he watched her, listened, waited. Megan poured herself into the research, not to fix him, but to understand him. She learned the science of cortisol spikes in abandoned dogs, the effects of survivor's guilt in animals who lose their primary bond. It was hauntingly human. The more she read, the more she realized she hadn't just underestimated a dog. She'd underestimated love's reach across species. She found the notebook while cleaning out Ben's old toolbox, tucked between rusted screwdrivers and faded blueprints. A navy blue journal with creased edges, filled with scribbles and half-sketched ideas. Tank Plus Trauma Therapy Program, Phase 1. VFW visits on Sundays. Emotional cue training? The handwriting was messy, but the intention behind it pulsed like a heartbeat. Page after page described a future Ben had envisioned, a way to give purpose to pain, to create something healing from the pieces war had broken. Megan sat on the garage floor, the notebook in her lap, Tank lying beside her with his head on her knee. Her eyes blurred, not just with grief, but with realization. Ben had seen something in Tank long before anyone else had. Not just potential, not just obedience, but heart. Within a week, she'd readopted him. The vet, Dr. Alvarez, didn't charge her. Neither did Thomas, the trauma dog specialist with military tattoos hidden beneath flannel sleeves. "This one's for Ben," they said more than once. And it became a kind of mantra, a compass. The work was slow. Tank would freeze at the sound of motorcycles, flinch at sudden door slams. But he always returned to her side, always tried. And so did she. Little by little, trust bloomed in their shared wounds. He learned to respond to emotional cues. She learned to let herself feel again. They practiced in crowded malls, at VA centers, and hospital lobbies. 6 months later, when the certification came in the mail, Megan didn't cry. Tank did what he always did now in moments of quiet celebration. He placed his head in her lap and stayed. The whispers had turned to echoes, and the echoes had become thunder. What began as a private humiliation turned reckoning inside room 214 had evolved into something far louder, unstoppable. By Friday, even freshmen in distant wings of Jefferson High were repeating the line, "Yo, you saw how Marcus straight up cooked Blake?" Hallways, once indifferent to Marcus Turner, now shifted with a new kind of energy when he passed. Not pity, not shock, but something closer to reverence. The clip had caught everything. Blake's smug challenge, Marcus's silent confidence, the flawless execution, the moment the teacher's face went slack with disbelief. Someone had edited it with music and text overlays. Never judge a book by its cover, or a genius by his seat in the back. It was everywhere. TikTok, Instagram, even on Twitter, where strangers debated systemic bias in education using Marcus as the centerpiece. But inside Marcus, there was no explosion of pride, only quiet satisfaction. He didn't want revenge. He never had. What he'd wanted was to be seen without distortion. And now, finally, the lens had shifted. Teachers began approaching him differently. Cautiously, yes, but with respect they hadn't shown before. A few, like Ms. Green from English Lit, spoke openly. "I had no idea, Marcus. That was incredible." He'd just nod, polite. He didn't need applause. He had proof now. And not on paper, not on grades, but in the way people looked at him like he belonged. When the invitation came from the State Youth Mathematics Alliance, he thought it was a mistake. The email's subject line read, "Keynote Guest Recommendation, Marcus Turner." Ben Goldman, a PhD candidate who'd seen the viral clip, had pitched Marcus to the board himself. "I've never seen someone that composed under pressure," he wrote. "He doesn't need our approval, but he deserves our platform." And then came the scholarship, a full ride to Tri-State University, no strings. Not based on race, not charity. Based on talent. Based on merit seen too late, but seen nonetheless. Mr. Blake, meanwhile, moved like a shadow of his former self. His jokes grew milder, his sarcasm softer, like a man walking barefoot across broken glass. He still taught class, but now avoided calling on students unless they raised their hands. The spark in his dominance was gone, snuffed out not by violence or rebellion, but by a single moment of clarity written in clean, calculated lines on a whiteboard. Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't need to. His silence had said enough.